The messages started after she was already dead, and I didn't know it. I had been seeing her for a short time, and everything moved fast, and I didn't mind that, until she started talking about moving in together like it was already decided. I told her no in a calm way, and I didn't leave room for confusion because I knew what I wanted and what I didn't. She didn't argue when I said it, but instead she just looked at me for a few seconds like she was holding something back. Then she grabbed her things and left without raising her voice, and that silence stayed with me longer than any argument would have. I told myself it was over, and I went back to my normal routine without expecting to hear from her again. 2 weeks later, my phone lit up with a message that didn't sound like her, and that's when everything started to go wrong. The first message didn't try to explain anything, and it didn't ask for a response, since it went straight to a threat that felt too specific to ignore. "I want to see you on the ground, bleeding." I stared at the screen longer than I should have, trying to match that tone with the person I knew, and it didn't fit, no matter how I looked at it. I called her once, but the call didn't go through, so I sent a short message asking what was going on, but I didn't get an answer. Instead, I got more threats that came faster and with more detail. "If I ever see you again, I will use a knife." I stopped replying after that, and I changed my number after a few days because I wanted it to end. The problem was that it didn't end, since the messages started again on the new number in less than 2 days. I had just started seeing a new girl. She showed me her phone one night, and when I read the messages she had received, I felt something shift because they were written the same way, and they mentioned things that me and my ex had done together that no one else should have known. The messages became more detailed over time, and they started to describe parts of my day that were too specific to ignore. They mentioned places I had been and things I had done only hours before. "You stopped at the gas station, and you looked behind you twice before getting in the car." I didn't go to the police because I kept thinking things would calm down if I reached her directly, and I didn't want to involve anyone else because she had a small child and I didn't want to make things worse for him. That decision started to feel like a mistake. That night I stayed home and kept things quiet, but the silence didn't help. It made every small sound stand out more than usual, and I found myself focusing on the back of the house without knowing why. My phone was on the table, and I kept looking at it without touching it because I was expecting another message, even though I didn't want to read it. There was a stretch of time where nothing happened, and that made it worse, because it gave me space to think about what could happen next. Then, the handle on the back door moved slowly, and I saw it turn without making a sound. I stood up and moved toward the kitchen because it was the only place where I could grab something useful, and I kept my steps steady, even though my breathing felt tighter than usual. The door opened, and a person dressed in black stepped inside with their face covered, moving forward without hesitation like they already knew the layout. I was sure it was my ex. Then I saw the light behind her, and it wasn't coming from outside. She had started a fire. The heat built quickly, and the smell of smoke spread through the room in a way that made it harder to focus. But I knew I couldn't stand still, because the person in front of me was already moving toward me with clear intention. I stepped back and kept my distance while watching her hands, expecting them to reach for something that could end it quickly. There was a brief pause where neither of us moved, and that pause stretched long enough to make me understand that I was alone in that moment, and that no one was coming to help me. She moved forward suddenly, and I reacted by pushing her back instead of trying to run, since the fire had already started to block the way out. We collided near the table, and something fell to the floor with a sharp sound that made everything feel louder and more chaotic. She grabbed my shirt and tried to pull me down, and I resisted by shifting my weight and pushing against her, even though I could feel my strength dropping faster than I expected. I managed to hit her hard enough to make her step back, and that gave me a second to pull away and create space. There was another moment where everything slowed down, and I could hear the fire spreading behind us while the smoke got thicker and harder to ignore. She reached toward my neck, and I reacted by grabbing her hood and pulling it back with force because I needed to see who I was dealing with. The hood came off, and the face underneath didn't match anything I expected. it wasn't her. It was another woman that I'd never seen before. Seeing her face changed everything, because it broke the only explanation I'd been holding on to, and that confusion made it harder to react in a clear way. She didn't look surprised or nervous, and that made it worse because it meant she had planned for this moment and accepted it. She moved again without saying anything, and this time her actions were more controlled. We hit the wall hard enough to shake the frame, and I felt a sharp pain in my arm when it struck something, but I didn't stop moving because I knew that stopping would give her control. Before the next move, I became aware of the fire reaching the hallway and the smoke filling the room in a way that made every breath shorter and more difficult. She grabbed my arm and twisted it with enough force to make me lose my grip, and I reacted by stepping into her and pushing her off balance instead of trying to pull away. That gave me just enough space to move toward the front of the house, where the air felt slightly clearer. In the middle of that movement, I heard sirens getting closer, and the sound cut through everything else in a way that made both of us react at the same time. She turned and ran toward the back, trying to escape before anyone arrived, while I stayed near the front because I didn't trust my body to hold up if I tried to follow her. At the station, I answered as clearly as I could, even though the situation didn't make sense anymore. They asked me about her, about the messages, and about the timeline, and I explained it all the same way I'd lived it. There was a pause where the officer across from me stopped writing and looked at me in a way that made it clear something wasn't right. And that moment made it harder to stay calm because I knew the answer wouldn't fix anything. He told me she had been found weeks ago, and that she already had been confirmed dead before the messages started, which didn't match anything I had experienced. I tried to correct him at first, but he already knew the timeline, and that made it clear that the problem wasn't a mistake. The woman they arrested had her phone, her accounts, and access to her identity, and she had been using all of it to contact me and track me without raising suspicion. That meant every message I had read and every threat I had tried to handle had been coming from someone else. The messages stopped after her arrest, but she left too many questions about how long she had been watching and how she had learned before acting. I changed my number again and adjusted my routine, but those actions didn't feel like enough after everything that had already happened. What stays with me is the fact that I spent months reacting to someone I thought I knew without realizing that the real person was already gone. After Carrie Farver was murdered in 2012 by Shayna Golyar, Farver's identity was used for years to send thousands of threatening messages to Dave Krupa and others, making it appear as if she was still alive and obsessively harassing them. This deception delayed the investigation and created a false narrative that misled both victims and authorities until digital evidence and forensic analysis eventually exposed the truth. I suddenly woke up at 4 a.m. I stayed still in bed looking at the door, trying to match the noise with something harmless. When I heard a slow step in the hallway, placed with care instead of casually, I understood that someone was moving with intention toward my room. I kept my breathing steady under the blanket, tried not to show that I was awake. The steps continued, spaced out, controlled. There was a part of the hallway floor that always creaked, and when I heard that exact sound right outside the bedroom, I understood that the person outside knew the house well enough not to avoid it. That detail made everything feel more deliberate. I thought about calling out, asking who was there, but I didn't want to hear an answer that would confirm what I was starting to suspect. Instead, I kept watching the door, waiting for something to happen so I wouldn't have to guess anymore. The handle turned slowly, and the door opened just enough to let someone enter without noise. And when the light from the hallway outlined the figure, I recognized the shape before I saw the face, and that recognition settled in immediately. There was a moment where he stood inside the room without moving, and during that moment I tried to convince myself I was wrong. He was my son. He stepped closer to the bed, and the axe in his hand became clear enough for me to understand that this was not confusion or panic, because there was no shaking and no hesitation. I tried to sit up and ask him what he was doing, but he didn't give me time. He raised the axe and brought it down on my head with full force, and the impact felt like everything inside my skull shifted at once. I fell back trying to react, but he lifted it again and struck a second time, hitting my arm when I tried to block it, and I heard something crack. I screamed his name again and again, trying to reach him in any way that I could, but he didn't respond. Instead, he just kept his focus steady while raising the axe again. I realized then that he was not reacting to me as his mother, but as someone he had already decided to attack. Before the next strike, there was a short pause while he adjusted his position, and I used that moment to try to move off the bed, because staying there meant I would take every hit directly. My hand slipped on the sheets, and I realized they were already wet with blood. The next blow landed on the side of my face, and my vision on one side disappeared instantly. Not blurred or fading, just gone. And I understood immediately what that meant. I tried to call his name again, but my voice didn't come out clearly. I reached toward him and grabbed his sleeve, holding on as tightly as I could because I needed something to interrupt what was happening. For a second I had contact, but he pulled back sharply and my grip failed because I didn't have enough strength. He looked at me directly while raising the axe again, and there was no confusion in his face, no hesitation, just a steady focus that made everything feel controlled. I tried to move again, but my body didn't respond the way I needed it to. Before the next strike, there was another pause, and I turned my head toward the other side of the bed because I needed to see if my husband could help me. What I saw made it clear that he had already been attacked before I woke up. He was lying on his back, and the amount of blood around him made it impossible to think he was unharmed, even though his eyes were open. I tried to reach him, but my arm didn't extend far enough, and I couldn't pull myself closer. The next hit came down on my head again, and I felt my ability to focus slipping because everything was becoming harder to follow. I made sounds that didn't form words, and I realized I was losing control over my voice. He stepped away from the bed after that and moved around the room, opening drawers and picking things up, and the way he did it made everything feel planned. I tried to follow him with my remaining eye, but my vision kept shifting. There was a pause where I thought he had left, but then I heard him step closer again, and I forced myself to look at him because I needed to confirm what I already knew. When I saw his face clearly, there was no doubt left. I tried to say his name again, but it came out broken, and he didn't react in any way that matched what was happening. Instead, he looked at me with a steady expression, as if everything were already decided. He lowered the axe slightly, not as a sign of stopping, but as if he had finished this part. And then he turned and walked out of the room without saying anything. I watched him leave, and I understood that he was not staying to make sure I was dead. I stayed where I was, trying to stay conscious because I didn't know if he'd come back, and I knew I wouldn't survive another attack. After he left the room, I could still hear movement in the house, which meant he was still there, and that made it impossible to relax. I listened carefully, trying to understand what he was doing, where he was. There was a pause before the next sounds, and during that time I forced myself to move, sliding my hand across the bed until I reached the edge, and then pulling myself toward it. My body rested, but I kept going. I slid off the bed and fell onto the floor, and the impact made everything feel unstable again. But I stayed conscious. I tried to push myself up, but I didn't have enough strength, so I stayed there. I was in and out of consciousness for a moment, and when I came to, my husband was gone from the bed. I slowly crawled out the door and down to the stairs. Downstairs, my husband was standing in the kitchen, moving normally, opening cabinets and placing items on the counter as if he had just started his morning routine. I tried to call out to him, but my voice came out broken and weak, and he didn't respond. He just continued moving. I watched him more closely, and that was when I noticed the details I'd missed at first. The way his body moved slightly off. The way there was too much blood for this to be normal. And I understood that he had already been attacked before I woke up. I tried to reach him, dragging myself forward, but I couldn't get close enough. Behind me, I heard movement again, and I knew my son was coming from downstairs, still holding the axe, still moving at that same controlled pace. I turned my head slightly enough to confirm without fully looking. I tried to think of something that would stop him, anything, but my voice and body wouldn't respond the way I needed them to. Eventually, I heard the front door open and close, and the silence that followed confirmed that he had left the house. The house stayed quiet after that, and I focused on staying conscious because I knew that was the only way I had a chance to survive. My breathing was uneven, and every moment caused pain, but I kept trying to stay alert. There was a pause before anything else happened, and in that time I listened for any sign of help because I had no other option. Then I heard a car outside, followed by footsteps approaching the house. The knocking came next, and when no one answered, it became louder, followed by voices calling out. I tried to respond, but my voice didn't carry, and I couldn't make enough sound. The door opened, and I heard people entering quickly, moving through the house until they reached the bedroom, where they stopped and then moved toward me with urgency. They checked me and confirmed I was alive, and that changed the way they handled me, making them more careful, but still fast. I tried to focus on them, but my vision was unstable. They asked questions, but I couldn't answer them properly, and I could feel everything starting to fade, even though I tried to stay awake. I woke up later in the hospital, and they explained what had happened, but I already knew the most important part, because I had seen him clearly. That memory did not change. They told me my husband had actually been alive after the attack, but that he didn't make it. In 2004, Christopher Porco carried out a brutal axe attack on his parents, Peter Porco and Joan Porco, inside their home. Peter suffered multiple catastrophic blows and later died, while Joan survived despite severe head trauma that left her permanently disfigured. One of the most disturbing aspects of the case is that Peter remained alive for hours after the attack, during which he got up, followed parts of his morning routine, and even prepared items in the kitchen before collapsing. My name is Anae, and I have to tell you a horrible story. But more importantly, a true story. I'm not telling it because I want to scare or impress anyone, but because it is a mark that I carry in my body and my mind. This is not something I heard on a newscast or a small-town rumor. It is my own nightmare come true, something that lived in every atom of my being. I was 14 years old when it all happened. I lived in a small town in Colombia, one of those places where everyone knows everyone else. My parents had warned me about strangers, of course, as all parents do, but it was not a place where we were really afraid. There was almost nothing in town, and that included visible dangers. It was a normal afternoon. I had gone out to the market to buy a few things for my mom. A simple list: rice, beans, and a package of cookies. I took a different way back because I had heard that you could save a few minutes if you went through an alley near the old school. It seemed like a good idea. It was early and still sunny. I didn't see it coming. When I think about how it all happened, I sometimes blame myself for being so trusting. But how was I supposed to know what to expect? Here I was, supposed to be in a safe place. I first saw him right at the end of the alley. He was dressed in a brown jacket and a hat that looked like a peddler's hat. He had a package in his hand and a clipboard under his arm. He was thin with small eyes and a thin mustache that twisted when he smiled. He spoke to me with a strange kindness, too calculated not to be suspicious. "Hello, girl. Could you help me with something real quick? I'm looking for Mr. Ramirez's house. I was told he lived nearby." I stopped because, although I didn't recognize the name he mentioned, Something in his tone made me doubt. But I didn't want to be rude. I told him I didn't know any Ramirez. Instead of leaving, he smiled wider and took a step toward me. "Oh, don't worry. Maybe I wrote it down wrong. By the way, my name is Tomas. It's nice to meet such polite young people." I didn't shake his hand. Something wasn't right, but how could I justify that feeling without seeming rude? I looked down and said I was in a hurry and that my mom was waiting for me. "I understand. Moms always want to have everything ready, don't they? Would you mind if I walked with you for a bit? This road is very lonely." Before I could answer, he already had closed the distance between us. He smiled at me again. The first movement was quick, a strong hand on my right arm pulling me toward him. I tried to scream, but his other hand covered my mouth. It was as if he had practiced this move hundreds of times. The market bag fell to the ground and the beans scattered on the dusty floor. Hey, it's okay. I don't want to hurt you." He was lying. I knew it in every fiber of my being. I squirmed, trying to free myself, but his grip was firm. He dragged me to a corner of the alley where there was an old wooden gate. He opened it with ease, as if he already knew the place. Behind the gate was an unkept lot full of weeds. The man took me quickly. He no longer seemed friendly. Now he was carrying me as if I were the shopping bag. I was terrified, but I wasn't going to allow myself to be caught without a fight. I managed to bite his hand, just enough for him to loosen his grip a little. I screamed at the top of my lungs, hoping someone would hear me. He didn't seem scared or nervous. He grabbed my shoulder and threw me to the ground. My plan had failed. "If you scream, it will be worse. You don't want this to be worse." He dragged me toward an old shed on the grounds. It was a small, dark place with a door barely held on rusty hinges. He pushed me inside and closed the door behind him. "Don't worry. This won't take long." I tried to back up but tripped over something on the floor. It was a broken bottle. I grabbed it quickly without thinking and lifted it as a weapon. Tomas smiled, not with surprise but with something that looked like amusement. Laughing, he advanced towards me, thinking that I would not dare to attack him, and without thinking twice, I lashed out with the bottle. The glass cut his hand, but I didn't get to see the blood since I took advantage of that moment to run away as fast as I could. I ran to the door, but it was locked with a padlock. The force of fear gave me the energy to try and break it. Tomas approached slowly, holding his wounded arm. I tried to find something to use as a tool, anything that would help me break the lock or defend myself. I felt my breathing quicken as my hands roamed for the door, looking for some way out. Behind me, his footsteps were slow, but sure. He seemed to enjoy every second as if the mere sight of me in despair was enough to fuel him. When he finally stopped a few feet away from me, he spoke again. "You know, girl, I always wondered what goes through someone's mind when they're cornered. Is it fear? Or maybe hope? Do you think you're going to get out of here?" I found a piece of old wood near the door and used it to hit the lock with all of my might. I hit it as hard as I could, but the lock wouldn't budge. I turned quickly and faced him with the wood up, ready to hit him if he came any closer. "Go ahead. Give it a try." In a desperate move, I threw the wood towards his face. It didn't hit him directly, but it was enough to make him turn away for an instant. I took advantage of the moment to push with all of my might on the door. The frame creaked, and although the padlock continued to resist, finally one of the hinges gave way. I managed to open a small space and slipped through just as he tried to catch me. I ran without looking back, hearing his footsteps following close behind me. My mind was focused only on moving forward, on getting away from that place. "I didn't expect you to be able to get away, girl, but I'll find you. I know where you live. I'll catch you. You'll see."
Now you've brought your whole family into this.
Ignoring him, I ran and ran. I don't remember how I got to the main road, but I did. A passing truck driver saw me and slammed on his brakes. I could barely speak. I just pointed to where I was coming from, hoping he would understand. The man called the police, and although they searched the area, they couldn't find Tomas. He had disappeared. After that day, my life changed forever. For weeks I couldn't sleep. Every shadow, every noise in the night made me think that he was there, waiting for me. But eventually, over time, I learned to move on. I never stopped looking over my shoulder, though. Years later, when I heard his name on the news, I froze. Luis Alfredo Gravito, known as the Beast, had been captured. Seeing his face on television confirmed what I had always suspected. I had not been his only victim, but I was one of the few who managed to escape. Now, every time I see his picture or hear his story, I feel a chill. Not because I fear him, but because I know that there are real monsters out there. They don't have horns or fangs. They have quiet smiles and soft words. And sometimes, just sometimes, you manage to escape them. This story is based on the crimes of Luis Alfredo Garavito, one of the most prolific and infamous serial killers in history. Known as the Beast, Garavito was a Colombian man who, during the 1990s, lured, tortured, and murdered over 190 children and teenagers. Posing as a priest, teacher, or charity worker, he would approach vulnerable boys, gain their trust, and offer them money or gifts before leading them to isolated locations. There, he subjected them to unspeakable acts of violence before killing them. Garavito's reign of terror ended in 1999 when he was arrested after the discovery of mass graves containing the remains of his victims. During his trial, he confessed to his crimes in horrifying detail, leading to a conviction with a cumulative sentence of over 1,800 years in prison, though Colombian law capped his sentence at 40 years. The case exposed critical failures in Colombia's justice system and raised questions about the rehabilitation and punishment of such criminals.